G'day everyone, welcome to part 2 of the How to Halo 2 Anniversary Battle Rifle. My name is of course Andrew DFT, and let's continue this build. Now in this next section we want to actually add a lot more layers and detail to this design. I'm going to go through and start to build up a few of these sections to really give it the iconic battle rifle features that are needed to complete the final design. So no more delays, let's jump right in. Alright, so to continue from where we left off, what we want to do is we're going to grab the template and cut out this section here. We're going to then transfer two of them onto a piece of EVA foam, so we have a left and a right, so be sure to flip the template to accord for that. Then what we'll do is we'll add a bevel line, a depth line, so that way we can cut this section in half. We don't need it as thick as it currently is, so we want to reduce that and make it about half the thickness. This will add a nice little level to the actual design and allow us to have that nice 3D aesthetic going on. So once we've got that piece cut out, you should have the two nice and thin there, and then we'll grab the template and start to break it down a bit further. We of course want to cut out this weird hexagon looking rectangle shape. I really need to get my shape facts sorted, but then cut that out of the template, use the negative space to actually transfer where it is in real space on the foam, and then we'll go ahead and break apart the template even further, cutting off this little end L section, making sure you cut through nice and cleanly, as it does have a few little right angles. You want to make sure that gets transferred on nicely. You can use a ruler to straighten the edges if need be, but it should sit there relatively nicely, then adding the vertical line needed to break apart those two sections. Now what we'll do is we'll grab the template, the overarching template, and we'll actually lay it down to where it should be sitting. This will allow us to trace the negative spacing for where that piece we just cut out will actually go. So that way you know exactly where it should be sitting, because if we placed it in where it shouldn't, it's going to cause problems for all the other remaining details down the line. So simply make sure that's glued in nicely there, using hot glue or art cement, whatever you prefer, and have it sitting super cool looking. Yeah. Now we're going to pretty much repeat the process, but for another section. We'll go for the lower magazine area. We'll of course want to make this look like it's a bit thicker than the rest of the build. So to do that, we'll actually cut out the section from the template, and then we will cut two new segments of the foam. Of course, being able to flip the template so you have a left and a right will give us the two different sides needed. Then of course we're adding that depth line about halfway through the foam, making it half the thickness, and then of course cutting it right through with the blade. Then simply grabbing your glue and putting it into position. You should be able to just put it in without the use of a template, because obviously there's nowhere else it would go. You're just aligning it up pretty much on the edges. Now this next section's a tad bit tricky. What you're going to do is you're going to grab this odd peculiar piece of template here, and then you're going to use the overarching one to lay it into position. The reason we're doing this is because you're going to be getting this weird angular line that goes around the perimeter here, because it's just going to add a bit of a detail later on when we get to it, which you'll see. So do that, it shouldn't be too hard, and then we'll cut out this little tiny segment at the bottom of this template. Once we've got this weird little angular line in, that's fine, you can leave it, because that also will become a nice piece of detail that just kind of breaks it all apart. Alright, so now we're at the cool stage, the part where we really make the battle rifle look like a battle rifle. So what we'll do is we'll grab the template and cut away the larger long section, and then we'll transfer two segments onto the foam, a left and a right, being sure to flip that template. Now what you can do is very carefully go through with a nice sharp craft blade and cut out all the individual triangle sections on this. Then using some tape, you can simply tape it down to make sure it doesn't move, and then go ahead using a pen and lightly draw in all those triangles, then go back with a ruler and make sure they're all symmetrical and line up perfectly. Then what you can do, once you've done them on both, the left and the right, make sure to flip that template, you can go ahead and cut out the bottom sections of this. We want to add in all the individual segments to make sure that these will all come together. Being sure to use your utmost patience and utmost skill and control in this, because this is a very key piece of detail on the rifle. You want to make sure that all these segments are being transferred in correctly. Now what we'll do is we'll add in a little bevel line. This little segment here with all these three individual pieces, you want to make sure you've got them on perfectly, because we're going to now add a depth line to do the beveling. Once we've added the depth line about maybe halfway through the foam, you can go back with a nice sharp craft blade. If you haven't changed it recently, I'd highly recommend, and cut through those segments, being sure to match up those bevel lines in the depth line to make sure you get that nice beveled edge looking clean. And just to be annoying, I've added a tiny one at the front of it as well. So we're going to repeat the process. We'll make sure we cut out that template, transfer it in there, and then we'll go ahead and add that depth line to the same depth as the previous, so about halfway through the foam. And then using that craft blade, which should still be pretty sharp, you can go ahead and cut that section off. Being sure to keep it well under control and finishing it off with a nice little clip at the end, so that way it's nice and flush. Now you will have noticed that we've left it at the full thickness of the foam, which is great, but we will bevel one of the edges just to round it out a bit. So we'll cut off the top horizontal line that you can see on the template, transfer it where it should be using the negative space, so that way we have this very nice long horizontal line in here. Then we're going to add a nice long horizontal depth line in about 3/4 of the way through the foam towards the textured side. So that way it's a kind of a nice thick and sharp gradient that we're going to have to go down for the bevel, and then patiently and very skillfully use your craft blade and go through and make sure you hit those lines, because this is a very key piece of detail. You want to make sure that those bevel lines are coming off as clean as you could ever possibly making it. That way it does look the part and the paint job will look even more fantastic because those lines are perfect. Then all that's left to do is go ahead and glue that in using the adhesive of your choice. Simply put it in, being sure to make all the lines line up. Of course, we've added in all the top detailing already, so all you need to do is make sure that the long segment matches up to all that horizontal lineage we've put in previously. Now we can start to flesh out the front of the gun, because at the moment it's looking rather naked, so we will give it some levels of its own. What we'll do is we'll grab the front bottom section, the part where you of course hold to grip yourself and support the rifle. We'll transfer that template onto a piece of foam, being sure to flip it so we get a left and a right. Then what we'll do is grab the template, cut it in half, so that way we can get this internal line transferred in where it needs to go, somewhere in the middle. Then what we'll do is we'll use that line and then add a depth line. The depth line is going to allow us to bevel this edge. Now you will already see it's a rather significant beveling that we're going to need to do, so be sure to replace your blade. You've got a brand new one sitting in there, and that you do give a lot of control into beveling this. Now of course that depth line you can put about 3/4 of the way through the foam towards the texture side, and then go through very skillfully with a lot of control, making sure your hands are well clear of the blade at all times. And this will take you some duration, because it took me about 4 to 5 minutes to actually go through. Of course this is time-lapsed, but it is a very significant piece that the blade will fight and the EVA foam will fight you on, so do be careful, but you will get that nice little curve done if you just go hard at it. But careful, safety is priority. Then you can go ahead and cut out the 2 little circles you can see on the template. Of course, you're going to need to use a craft blade for this, as you won't be able to get scissors in there. Then what you can do is lay it on the template and simply transfer where those circles should be. Moving on, we can then cut apart the top section of the template. Of course, this is going to act as our top bevel edge. We want to grab that horizontal line, chuck it in there, and then we'll need to add the depth line. Now with this side, you can maybe give it about halfway through the thickness. We don't need to go all or 3/4 depth. We want it to sit about halfway. Once you've got that line in, then you can go ahead and bevel that edge. You probably might want to change the blade out, because the previous side absolutely probably wore it to death, and you'd get very weird fragmentation with this if you used the same blade. So go ahead and flip it out, or at least test on a new or a scrap piece of paper, a scrap piece of foam, sorry, to see if it still works. Otherwise, once it's all beveled, you can simply go glue it into position and it should sit in there perfectly fine. Now grab the template, lay it on top of the remaining section, and then transfer in that horizontal line that links up between the 2 circles. Of course, that gives it a nice little segmentation that we do need, and will add a lot more extra design to the end when we bevel it, when we score it. Now what we'll do is we'll grab the bottom section of this template, cut off the front little triangle, and transfer that in so that way it completes the design and completes that line that goes from the top all the way through the circles down to the bottom. Perfect. Now with that piece out of the way, we'll jump onto the top section. So what we'll do is we'll grab the template you can see here, break it into 2 parts, and we'll grab the top section and transfer it onto the foam, giving us 2 more segments. Of course, being sure to flip that template. By now you're probably used to that, so I won't remind you. But of course, once you've got those, cut them free from the larger foam, and then add a depth line. The depth line can be about halfway through this one, so that way we know it's going to be a lot thinner than the previous piece we just added. Then break apart the template even further, and we'll slowly transfer all these individual lines we can see on the piece of paper. Being sure to make all these lines come across nice and crisp, transfer them lightly first, and then go ahead with a ruler of some sort, or just a straight edge, and clean up them and make them nice and dark, so that way you can see exactly where they are, being sure to make them straight as well. That's pretty key, make sure they're straight. Then what you can do is, of course, we're going to add in this tiny little vertical line that goes on the top section here, making sure it doesn't actually go all the way through the whole line, it just goes in those top 2 segments. Once you've got that all completed, we can go ahead and glue it into position. If it doesn't sit in there entirely perfect, of course, just add a bit of trimming where needed, as the foam tends to kind of bend and move or scale itself up during the process. It just magically does that, but you can trim it to make it fit perfectly. Now this segment here, you can see we're actually going to add into the pre-existing layers of the foam. We don't want to add anything else, we want to give it that nice terraced effect. So what we'll do is we'll grab the templates, break it up into the sections you can see, and then we'll grab this part here and lay it out onto the foam. Exactly, it should just fit in nicely, and transfer in that line, that weird, I don't know, I'm like pointing it, but of course you can't see me, so that didn't help. And then once you've gotten that in there nicely, we can then break apart that left section of the template and transfer in that vertical line. This is all just additional detail that the actual design does have, so we want to make sure we can replicate that as best possible on our EVA foam. Then of course, we'll slowly repeat the process and work our way up the template, being sure to add in all those lines and make them as straight and horizontal and symmetrical as all the other lines on the design at this point. Once we've got all the templates lined in there nicely, what we're going to do is we will just leave it, because we're going to score all these together, but we do need to add a bevel section to this. We want to really round this off, so we will add a depth line as close as you can towards the inner layer of that one piece of foam. So you can see how it's gone in as close as it can, maybe at 3/4 depth, and then of course jump in with a nice sharp craft blade and bevel off that section. Being sure to be as careful as possible, because this is a primary piece of detail, we do want to make sure that it does look the part. Alright, so you're doing really well. We're nearly at the end of part 2. We've nearly got all like 80% at least of all the detail in that we need. So to finish this off, we'll quickly cut out this template, transfer it onto the foam, being sure to flip it, get at those 2 pieces, and then what we'll do is we'll just straight up add a depth line to it. We want to make this about half the thickness it currently is, so grab that depth line and then go ahead with the craft blade and cut that segment in half. We don't need to add too much detail to this, we'll leave it as the one thickness it currently is. We'll just simply add a few little lines, or to be specific, 1. We'll cut the template into 2 pieces, lay that on, transfer in that peculiar line, or 3 lines I guess, and then we'll just go ahead and glue it into position. It should slot in there perfectly. Like I said, if it doesn't, you will just need to do a few little bits of trimming to make it look flush. Okay, so to finish this off, all we need to do is add in these tiny little pieces of detail that sit on the bottom of the support area, the forward grip, I guess you could call. What you're going to do is you're going to transfer in these tiny little segments by cutting them out. Now you might need to do this manually, I certainly did, because it is very hard and very picky to actually go through and trace them on. So what you can do is just use the template as a basic kind of like guideline to know where exactly they should sit, how many should be on there, and then all you need to do is use a ruler to finish them in. So, that's it. The end of part 2. We've really started to flesh out this gun, and it's really coming together and looking like the final design we wanted to achieve. But we're not there just yet. We do have a few more details that we have to add in and round it out, adding a few more sections as well to give it that battle rifle appearance, as well as the barrel. I won't be touching on a scope in this tutorial purely because it might throw a bunch of you off, and it is very hard to achieve out of EVA foam. But for what most people do, and what I've done myself, is go to like $2 shops or very cheap toy stores. You can find some pretty old looking plastic scopes, repurpose them and put them on your battle rifle. It costs you very small amount of money and you just need to paint them black and they look the part. But I'm sorry if I've annoyed you. The key focus in this is getting the base rifle done, so that way you guys can go and customize it and add additional features yourselves. Otherwise, all that's left is to click on part 3, or 3, when it appears on screen. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Click like on the video if you enjoyed the content, and I will catch you guys later.